The crashing of the waves and the howling of the wind all but absorb the sounds of conversation or even the intermittent screams of the inhabitants of Gilgo Oak Beach, a remote backwoods stretch of wetland and sandy dunes located off of Ocean Parkway. The ruralness of Oak Beach, one of the tiny, thin islands on the southern tip of Long Island, is in direct contrast to the bustling urban New York City, just over 50 miles away by car. This entire strip of land is referred to as Jones Beach Island, owned by the nearby town of Babylon, New York, and is an area mostly frequented by tourists in the spring and summer months. But missing amongst the brochures for vacation homes and boat rentals is any sign that upwards of 16 people have been found brutalized and buried barely in the area's beaches and marsh. Those who visit the surf of Gilgo Beach in search of serenity and selfies are often unaware that a serial killer is currently on the loose, uncaught and nameless to this day. The first inkling that a serial killer was on the loose was prompted by the search for 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert, a call girl who had disappeared after a panicked 911 phone call in May of 2010. In searching for her body, police were unsuccessful, but shockingly, in December of 2010, investigators instead made the gruesome discovery of 4 more bodies by the side of Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Oak Beach. Shannon, though not located in the initial search, was the impetus to comb the area. Just after midnight on May 1st of 2010, 23-year-old escort Shannon Gilbert made a phone call to her driver, Michael Pock. The call lasted 3 minutes, in which her driver says Shannon told him that she was finished with her current client in Manhattan and needed to be retrieved. This was a common practice of call girls in the city. A driver would act as an outside security figure to whom the girls, often newly independent and highly vulnerable, could rely on for safe transportation. In exchange, the drivers would be paid an hourly wage or get a cut of the call's fee, while the escorts were the ones who interacted face-to-face with the clients, known in the industry as Johns. The drivers were the girls' connection to the outside world, ideally just a call away. At 12:20 a.m., Shannon was contacted by another potential client, presumably through Craigslist, although her driver never specified. Her driver, Michael Pock, never says how the man, later identified as Joseph Brewer, got the sex worker's number, with the driver merely telling police that another client had called from Long Island for Shannon's services. At 2 a.m., the pair arrived at the gated community of Joseph Brewer, the John who had requested Shannon's services. Some question why Shannon would accept such a remote call, as it takes just a little over 90 minutes to reach Ocean Parkway from Manhattan, and call girls generally avoided the area. Some speculate this was for services beyond intimacy, and a slip of the tongue from Shannon's driver revealed that drugs had also been involved, as he recalls that Shannon and Joseph left at some point during the call to get, quote, more drugs. Later, Michael, Shannon's driver, recalls being requested in the John's home as Shannon was supposedly refusing to leave, an unusual turn of events for both the John and the driver. When Michael entered the upscale but messy domicile, so trashed in part due to many nights of partying, he entreated Shannon to leave. This fact is evidenced by the panicked 911 call Shannon made, which was recorded and finally released to the public more than a decade after the crime. In the recorded 911 call, Michael Pock sounds not angry but confused in his pleas with Shannon to leave the home. The recordings show that he was trying to get Shannon to exit the house and offering to take her back to New York City. Police do not suspect Michael Pock, as he even at one point talked to Shannon on the 911 recording and acknowledged that she was on the phone with authorities and seemed okay with it, albeit confused. He did not sound mad that Shannon had contacted authorities, nor did he sound aggressive. Although, on the 23-minute phone call, you can hear Michael reminding Shannon that he had his gun on him. It is unknown if the gun was legally acquired or if he had a permit to carry it concealed. So many find it unsurprising that he may have wanted nothing to do with the police that night.
State Police, Trooper Fry. State Police.
Yeah, there's somebody after me.
I'm sorry?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you?
There's somebody after me.
Okay, where are you?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you, ma'am?
I don't know.
You're driving right now?
No, I'm inside the house.
I'm sorry?
I'm inside the house.
What house?
I don't know. Can you trace where I am?
I'm sorry?
Can you trace where I am?
No, I can't. What's your callback number you're calling from?
Huh?
What phone number are you calling from?
Somebody's after me. Please.
Are you in Suffolk County or Nassau County?
I'm in Long Island.
Where on Long Island are you?
No. 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 No, stop, no.
Where in Long Island are you? In Suffolk County? Nassau County?
Huh? Why? Why you call me by my name? Why?
County, you on the line?
Stop. Please. Stop it, please. Please stop. Please. Can you shut the door?
No, time to go.
Please.
You okay?
Please.
Go.
Please.
Go that way, please. Okay. Go, come on, let's go. Come on, roll that side. This side. Come on, go outside. Oh. Come on, all of us. Come on, roll that side. Come on.
No, please.
Come on. Come on. Please, come on.
Please.
Come on.
Why?
Just come out here. Come on. I'll go upstairs. I'll go upstairs. You leave. I'm going to go upstairs. Look, I'm going to go upstairs. You leave. I'm going to go upstairs. Okay? You leave. Please. Please. Get there. My hold. What's the matter? Are you okay?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do to me?
She's in a house on my...
Why?
Huh? Well, I don't know, but it was transferred to me.
Why?
No.
Are you going to kill me?
It's running through, I think it's Suffolk County on the left side for the person. The county won't answer me.
Kill me? Why are you going to
Call Suffolk County.
You freaking down. Come on.
I'm in the middle of nowhere?
Let's go back to Manhattan. All right? We're in Long Island. We're out near the water.
Please, stop.
Me, Mike. Brother, come on.
No, stop it, please. Hello? Please.
Hello?
Please.
What's the matter? What happened? Hello?
Please, get me out of here, Lace.
Hello?
You're being sarcastic about this. You were part of this all along.
Those who believe that police are correct in clearing Shannon's driver rather early on in the investigation argue that if there had been any connection to the other victims killed, it would have been discovered long ago, and he would have been seen as a suspect due to his proximity to the victim in the recording. The fact that police cleared him showed that there was no connection made to any of the other sex workers whose lives were tragically taken.
Shannon.
Gus Coletti, a resident in the gated community to which Brewer, the John who had called Shannon was a part of, had already awoken and begun his strict morning routine. As he was shaving, he heard Shannon screaming from outside his home, quote, help me, they're going to kill me." A consummate gentleman and inquisitive mind, Gus Coletti opened the door for Shannon and led the panicked girl to a chair before calling authorities himself. While on the line with 911, Gus is heard urging the young woman to tell him what was wrong, but he recalls she just stared at him. As he tried to reassure her that authorities were being contacted, Shannon ran back off into the night, seemingly alarmed that 911 had been called, although she had been on the phone herself with dispatchers only moments prior.
Shannon.
What's the matter? Somebody at you? Huh?
Hello? Hello?
Are you alright? Don't get yourself hurt. Where are you going? Wait a minute. Where are you going? Where are you going?
As she ran into the darkness, Gus noticed that a black SUV was stopping in the road randomly, as if searching for someone. That black SUV was being driven by Michael Pock, who was frantically looking for Shannon after she ran out of Joseph Brewer's home. Moments after seeing the black SUV sporadically stopping in the road, Gus notices Shannon. This time, she's ducked under his boat, as if hiding from the SUV. While Shannon was hiding, the driver stopped and asked Gus if he had seen a woman who had left a house party, to which Gus replies that he had and the authorities had been contacted. Gus recalls being disturbed by Michael's response. Quote, "You shouldn't have done that. She's going to get in a lot of trouble." However, later, upon the realization that Shannon had been engaging in illegal sex work, those lines would become less ominous and more indicative of the unyielding political climate surrounding sex work. It was illegal to be a sex worker in New York City. While call girls were allowed to advertise their services as being escorts on dates or as maids in homes, they were not allowed to engage in sexual activity. Gus, after interacting with Michael and hearing these words, watched as the young woman ran off into the darkness of the early morning, as it was not yet dawn. This would be the last time Gus Coletti saw her, The last time Gus Coletti saw Shannon, she was running towards the intersection of Sandy Drive. Michael later claims that he believed Shannon to be angry at him and therefore that she decided not to get a ride home with him. He left to go back to New York City, neglecting to alert authorities that Shannon was not in his care. While Gus did not see Shannon again, his neighbor did. Barbara Brennan's home is more noticeable than the ones to the right or left, which is a possible factor in why Shannon chose to reach out to her specifically. Barbara's home features a constant lit vigil, which she has kept in remembrance for her husband. When Barbara heard Shannon banging on her door, Barbara was understandably alarmed, and instead of opening the door to this unknown stranger, she placed 2 phone calls. The first is to police at approximately 5:22 a.m., and the second is to her neighbor, Tom Canning, who would come over with his hunting dog. Their actions evidently scared Shannon, who ran back into the darkness and away from the safety of civilization. This would be the last time that Shannon was seen alive. Authorities, meanwhile, arrived on scene and searched for Shannon on foot. However, they recall they neglected to search the marshes due to the water level, a fact that later would become contentious. Originally, Suffolk County Police Department's Missing Persons Bureau had asked that Shannon be searched for by a cadaver dog, a German Shepherd named Blue. Over the course of the entire summer of 2010, after the panicked phone call had been placed to police dispatch, the area had been searched. However, the dog's handler continued his search, and their work paid off on December 11th, 2010, although not in the way they were hoping nor expecting. Basing the new search area off the fact that statistically, FBI data indicate that purposefully abandoned bodies are frequently found close to roadways, the handler of Blue, the cadaver dog, led the dog to a new search area. There, shockingly, Blue was able to uncover, over a period of 2 days, 4 bodies which had been dumped in the area. But in a twist unexpected by authorities, none of the female bodies found were Shannon, the original search target. While the heavy vegetation, coupled with a light layer of snow, caused the area to be initially overlooked by previous human searchers, Blue the cadaver dog was able to alert to a scent which handler officer John Malia was able to use to locate skeletal remains, which had been placed in a disintegrated burlap bag. These initial remains were later identified as that of Melissa Bartholomew and would be the first of 4 bodies found in the span of 2 days. Police would ultimately uncover 3 additional bodies in their investigation of the stretch of Ocean Parkway. These victims would be unearthed from the oppressive conditions of the surf and surrounding marshland. This entire area was a confluence of wind, sun, sand, and stone, which made artifact recovery a very difficult task. The victims, Maureen Brainerd, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, were all found within 500 feet, or 150 meters, from each other and would be dubbed the Gilgo Four. But while the community of Long Island would be rocked by such findings, these would only be the first of many brutalized bodies to come, as eventually more than 10 victims would be found in the general vicinity of the area, confirming what police had initially suspected: a serial killer was on the loose. Dominic Barone, who was at the time chief of detectives for Suffolk County Police Department, says that the physical characteristics of the victims, referred to as the Gilgo Four, are significant. The police chief noted similarities in the victims' small stature, petite weight, and hazel eyes, as well as their profession of call girls and their utilization of Craigslist as an advertising platform. The chief goes on to discuss how the killer used sites such as Backdoor and Craigslist in order to search for certain heights, weights, and eye colors of the victims. Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, victims who were found later in 2011, also fit this Gilgo 4 phenotype. What also connects the victims to a single killer is the presentation of the victims' remains. Most of the bodies were found wrapped or tarped in burlap material. Police have not disclosed how the bodies were specifically displayed, but do indicate that the material burlap was significantly involved in most, if not all, of the victims found in the area. Part of the job description of a call girl, the vocation of all 4 of the brutalized women found at Gilgo Beach, is to go along with strangers for pay. Such a line of work necessitates certain survival techniques. While many of the victims posted their images and information online on sites such as Craigslist and Backdoor, ultimately it was up to the girl whether or not to accept a job and how to take the call. Detectives think that the fact 2 of the Gilgo 4 willingly left their phones behind indicates a possible level of intimacy with this John, as going to a call without a phone was highly out of the ordinary. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was the first of the 4 women later found on Gilgo Beach to initially go missing. She was last heard from on July 9, 2007. In 2007, Maureen had called her friend Sarah to say that she had been robbed of all her cash, but not of her phone. She requested a ride from Sarah, who lived in Connecticut, but her friend was unable to pick her up. This would be the last time that anyone heard from Maureen. Maureen brought her phone to the job that would be her last. Later, it is speculated that the killer may have gone through Maureen's cell phone contacts in order to get the phone number of Sarah, Maureen's friend from Connecticut. A man contacted Sarah from an unfamiliar number that may have been from a burner phone. The caller did not specify how he had gotten Sarah's number, but commented on the fact that her phone number had a Connecticut area code, and said that he had recently interacted with a young woman who was also from that area. He claimed that he had recently seen Maureen alive, and that she was currently at a, quote, whorehouse in Queens. The cold and emotionless voice would not give his name, nor did he give a specific location. The caller also claimed that he would call back and give Sarah the precise address. However, he never called again. In the ensuing year, the NYPD had reported no trace of Maureen nor pings from her phone, but then, in 2008, Maureen's phone made contact with a Long Island cell tower on Fire Island, a couple of miles from where Maureen would eventually be found. Forensic investigators say that the 2008 ping was the result of the phone being powered on and used to check the voicemail of Maureen. This accessing of Maureen's voicemail was over 1 year after Maureen was presumably killed. Therefore, investigators say it must have been the killer to access her voicemail, thus activating the nearest cell tower from an island called Fire Island. The second victim to go missing, chronologically, in the cluster of 4 found at Gilgo Beach was Melissa Bartholomew. She had worked hard to get her cosmetology license and dreamed of one day opening her own hair salon. She went missing on July 10, 2009, 2 years after Maureen disappeared and about 1 year before Shannon would go missing. As in Maureen's case, the killer utilized the victim's phone to contact a loved one, Melissa's sister, Amanda Bartholomew, who lived in Buffalo, New York. She was contacted by the killer just days after Melissa's disappearance. In a brazen deviation from the last set of harassing calls made to Maureen's friend Sarah, the killer this time utilized Melissa's own cell phone to make the phone call. The call seemed to be from her sister, so Amanda quickly answered, only to hear not the voice of her sister, but the voice of her sister's killer. The calls consistently occurred only in the evenings. Inexplicably, the police do not have recordings of the calls, but Amanda, just 16 at the time, remembers them all too well. She recalls that what she heard on the line gave her chills. "Is this Melissa's sister?" she recalls a man asking in a low voice. Amanda recalls simply replying yes to the man before he asked sinisterly, "Do you know what your sister's doing? She's a whore." Amanda's mother, Lynn, tried to answer these sadistic calls on one occasion, but when the killer heard her voice, he hung up. Lynn would document the encounters in a journal, which she gave detectives, but no viable leads were released as a result. Though police were informed of the calls, which occurred over a period of weeks, investigators waited far too long to set up any sort of tracing or recording mechanism, and media reports differ in if they were ever successful. It took Melissa's family soliciting help from a family friend in law enforcement in order to get any usable data on the call's originations. The phone company was able to tell the family that the killer's calls had pinged through at least 3 different towers. 2 were in New York City, one near Times Square and the other near Madison Square Garden, and one was from the town of Oyster Bay in Nassau County, very close to the last location that Melissa was known to be alive, as she had checked her voicemail from that location. Some reports detail that when police finally had the phone hooked up to a tracker, they were foiled by the killer yet again, as he limited his taunts to under 3 minutes. Due to the technology available at the time, a call that took less than 3 minutes would be untraceable to police. In August of 2009, after a Buffalo television station irresponsibly reported on the tracing attempts and cell tower ping results, the calls ceased. Police believe the killer to be adamantly following the case through media reports, and such a leak led the man to use more caution and to stop calling. Chronologically, the first 2 victims of the Gilgo Beach 4 had loved ones who were contacted and taunted after the girls' disappearance. The supposed killer called Maureen's friend Sarah from an untraceable line and Amanda, Melissa's sister, from Melissa's own phone. The last 2 victims of the Gilgo 4, Amber Costello and Megan Waterman, were somehow convinced to leave their phones behind when meeting the John. It is uncommon for call girls to go into someone's house without a connection to the outside world, but these 2 seemingly willingly went in without their phones. Megan's mother says such actions are not something that her daughter would normally do, as she was very attached to her phone. Some web sleuths dedicated to the cause wonder if the killer had utilized an excuse about a medical condition to keep the girls disconnected from the world. Some postulate if the killer may have suffered from a heart arrhythmia and may have had a pacemaker type of device implanted. He possibly could have used that as an excuse for the girls to not have their cell phones, as technology at this time was thought to interact with implanted heart devices negatively, and patients were told to keep cell phones 6 inches away from their implanted device and to be wary around different types of powerful technology. Amber's male roommate recalls talking to her before she left to engage in what would be the last call of her life. He says that he tried to encourage her to bring her phone with her. However, she was adamant that the client did not wish her to bring it. However, she did not further elaborate. Those who carry this theory say that whether or not the condition was real or made up, it certainly could explain why the girls chose to leave their cell phones behind. The other victim who was convinced to not bring her phone was Megan Waterman. She would accept jobs at the request of her boyfriend, Akeem Cruz, who called himself Vibe and doubled as her pimp. Vibe would use a laptop to place ads for her services and would accompany her to the Holiday Inn Express in Hauppauge, New York. She was last seen wearing a yellow shirt on CCTV footage in the lobby of the hotel room. Before she left the premises, a witness last spotted Megan near a liquor store. This would be the last time that Megan was seen alive. Cops questioned her so-called handler, Vibe, and took possession of his laptop, but police say he is currently not a suspect. In March of 2011, just 3 months after the Gilgo 4 had been located, the dismembered hands, forearm, and skull of a then unidentified female were found along a nearby stretch of Ocean Parkway. These remains were eventually DNA matched to a torso that had been discovered in Manorville, a nearby town in Suffolk County, back in 2003. These remains were located 1 mile east of the original dump site. These body parts, separated by time and dump site, would later be identified as that of Jessica Taylor, 20. Then, on April 4th, 2011, Another skull, pair of hands, and right foot were found in a plastic bag near Ocean Parkway on Gilgo Beach. These remains would be designated as Jane Doe number 6 until being linked by DNA to the Manorville Jane Doe. Similarly to the torso discovered in 2003, another female torso had been discovered in November of 2000. The torso of the woman was discovered by hikers in the Long Island Pine Barrens in Manorville. It had been wrapped in plastic garbage bags and unceremoniously dumped into the woods near Halsey Manor Road. For many years, the identity of the owner of the torso was unknown. But almost a decade later, in 2020, police announced that they had positively identified the Manorville Jane Doe as Valerie Mack, 24, born July 2, 1976. The same day, April 4th, that the second female torso was found, police discovered 2 additional sets of skeletal remains, an unidentified female toddler, Baby Doe, and an unidentified Asian male who was small in stature and was reportedly donning female clothing. Police speculated that this unnamed male may have been mistaken for a woman by his killer. While adult females were dismembered, the lack of mutilation of the toddler and of the Asian male shows that there may have been an underlying sexual aspect to the mutilations, but not to the killings themselves. Perhaps the killings were done in order to get the victims to their preferred state. Police wondered if, for the killer, it was more about the destination than the journey. Detectives say that the dismemberment occurred in a particular manner, of which the police have not released more details. Then, on April 11th, 2011, in what was becoming a sad and shocking pattern of death and mutilation, 2 more bodies were found in Nassau County. The first piece of remains found that day was the skull of an unidentified woman. True to the patterns beginning to emerge, the woman's dismembered legs had previously been discovered on Fire Island back in 1996. These remains would be referred to as Fire Island Doe. Police would eventually make the connection that this very island was the same island from which Gilgo 4 victim Maureen Brainerd Barnes' phone had last pinged. A gruesome geographic perimeter of attack was emerging. Just as in the first body found that morning, a portion of the remains of the second body found that day had also been previously uncovered, this time by a hiker on a beautifully deceptive spring day in 1997. The hiker accidentally stumbled upon an unidentified woman's dismembered torso wrapped inside a plastic bag and put in a Rubbermaid container. Seemingly of African American descent, the torso was found in Hempstead Lake Park, New York. This victim bore a distinctive tattoo of peaches arranged in a heart shape, thus she was nicknamed Peaches by investigating officers. These remains were later identified as the body of the mother of the unidentified toddler, whose remains had been located in Suffolk County a few weeks prior, and who police had been referring to as Baby Doe. On November 29, 2011, police announced that they believed one person to be responsible for all 10 murders. They commented further that they believed the perpetrator was almost certainly a local from Long Island. Police disclosed that, although cause of death was unable to be determined, the single killer theory stemmed from common characteristics of the victims, and they noted many similarities between the individual treatment of the bodies and the condition of the remains. Later, police would announce a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in the Long Island murders, but to no avail. In December of 2011, Shannon Gilbert, the impetus to the original unearthing of countless remains, was finally found, deceased, in Oak Beach, 19 months after her mysterious disappearance. Perplexing to both the public and the police, her purse and some of her clothes were found nearly half a mile from where her body was located. Police, in what many believe is an illogical theory, state that Shannon must have been panicked and cold and most likely had undressed herself before accidentally drowning. The true cause of her death is still contested, as state medical examiners claimed her death to be accidental yet her family believes otherwise and refused to bury her. Their tenacity in uncovering the truth led to a legal battle, which caused Shannon's remains to lay in the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's office for 4 years until she could be re-examined by another forensic scientist. A private and unbiased autopsy report states that Shannon's hyoid bone, a U-shaped bone in the throat area, was shattered, indicating a manual strangulation, as the hyoid bone is not able to be broken from natural forces. Shannon's hyoid bone was missing its so-called horns, the horn-shaped tips that make up the U-shape of the free-floating bone. Shannon's bones had been boiled so that state forensic anthropologists would be able to examine them. However, this caused the bones to be devoid of soft tissue, and by the time the independent medical examiner could investigate her body, there was no way to verify the possible presence of ligature marks, which would be leftover forensic artifacts of a manual strangulation. According to the FBI, manual strangulation is statistically the most common method of silencing women who are victims of a homicide. Another discrepancy in the condition of Shannon's remains as it relates to cause of death is the position in which Shannon was discovered. Shannon was found face up in the marshy area of Oak Park. However, normally drowning victims are found face down, as that is where the weight is distributed when the victims are allowed to free float. The stomach and the chest and the face go into the water because that is where the weight is distributed. Some critics of the one killer theory point to the variety of the disposal of the victims' bodies as a reason that more than one man may be involved. This is because some of the victims were found dismembered and others were found completely intact. Some were found wrapped with various substances such as plastic, burlap, or Rubbermaid Tupperware, while others were simply left to nature. Those who disagreed with the single killer theory used this as evidence that separate killers may have been responsible. However, when it comes to serial killers, there is a common myth of consistency. While the behaviors, the vices, or the morality mind games they play on themselves may be the same, the manner in which they choose to enact these fantasies can vary, based on time, location, or intended victim, amongst other mitigating factors. Strangely enough, while mutilation was a factor in many of the female cases, the Asian male, who was dressed as a woman and possibly transgender, along with the baby, was not mutilated in any way. This could hint at a possible motivation for the mutilation that far exceeds simply that of killing. Police wondered if taking away the victim's identity was part of the killer's goal. In separating their bodies, he made it much harder for police in the late 90s and early 2000s to piece together the various homicides. This concern with keeping his victims nameless could be seen as an element of a power play in the killer's mind. FBI profilers have speculated that the killer may derive power knowing that the family and friends of those lost may never get closure. This power could deepen the thrill of the kill. The phone calls made by the killer continue a pattern of sadism, thus extending the suffering of the loved ones of those he killed. Some speculate that the killer is also responsible for the brutal murders of 4 sex workers who were found in a ditch behind the Golden Key Motel in West Atlantic City on November 20th, 2006. These 4 female bodies were found 1 year before the Gilgo 4 began to go missing. The similarities are stark, and a New York Post article was able to quote a law enforcement agent, who refused to be named, as saying, quote, "It's the same guy," in regards to the similarities of the 4 prostitutes found dead in 2006 when compared to the 4 who began to go missing in 2007. This case has now spanned more than 2.5 decades. And although police have released tidbits of evidence over the years in order to publicly appeal for leads, the pool of suspects has been relatively small and shallow from the start. There's a theory that the Long Island serial killer may have been a current or former cop. That would explain how he was able to stay ahead of law enforcement for so many years. Investigators have looked at the possibility of a police officer being the killer, but have come up with nothing. This theory of officer involvement was due, in part, to the fact that whomever contacted Amanda, Melissa Bartholomew's sister, seemed to have some knowledge of police tracking techniques. This caller knew to keep his calls short, and he called from heavily populated areas full of tourists. He also knew when to stop, as once the story about the phone calls broke, no other calls were made. Besides the phone call connection, investigators uncovered that one of the final people to be in contact with Maureen Brainerd Barnes was a Staten Island police officer who was acting as a client looking for her escort services and not as part of any police investigation. No further details have been released about the status or identity of that police officer, but investigators say that he is not a suspect. While the sheer boldness of the killer terrified the public, police were more interested in the techniques used to harass the family members of certain victims. Investigators surmised that the killer, or killers, must have possessed semi-advanced skills in forensic electronic techniques. While it would not require a technical genius for the killer to stay anonymous online, the fact that he managed to mask his IP address during that time implies some knowledge of VPNs, which are online tools which allow users to hide their IP addresses by substituting it with another untraceable one. Those closest to the case are frustrated by the lack of progress and cite the old adage, "too many cooks in the kitchen," as one of the main impediments to success in finding a suspect. In addition to the local police departments that were investigating, the case was being looked into by New York State Police, Nassau County Police, Suffolk County Police, and New York City Police, as the call girls had originated in Manhattan. Later, the FBI would offer their assistance, but would be denied with hostility, as, in a strange turn of events, the man tasked with finding the killer was now at the center of an investigation of his own shocking crimes. Amidst the chaos of having a potential serial killer on the loose, Long Island area cops were questioning the recent appointment of James Burke as police chief of Suffolk County, the only 4-star ranking officer on the force and a highly respected position. This position should have come with an equal level of responsibility. However, that was a trait not exhibited by Burke, who was known to have dabbled in drugs and prostitution from the onset of adulthood. According to the New York Times, prior to becoming the highest paid on the force as Suffolk County Police Chief, Burke had been found to have copulated with a sex worker who was known to be a heavy drug user. Early on in his career in law enforcement, Burke was found to be having a relationship with a prostitute who ended up stealing his service revolver. Burke had also previously confessed to having driven drunk numerous occasions while on the job. Ultimately, what finally got him arrested was when a low-level criminal broke into the police chief's SUV and in doing so unearthed the bag of intimate toys. In finding the robber, the police chief made the choice to physically torture the man for his misdeeds, which led to the chief's public sexual humiliation. Many cite Burke's numerous circumventions of the law as being related to Burke's professional and personal friendships with charged criminal and former district attorney Thomas Spada, in whose office Burke had previously worked. One call girl later told Internal Affairs that she had been intimate with Burke at an Oak Beach sex party, which was coincidentally located just over 2 miles from the location of the later serial killer victims' bodies. Legislator and former cop Rob Trotta told the media in regards to Burke and his touting of the law, order, and common decency, quote, "He was a psychopath." Finally, in November of 2016, the now former police chief James Burke was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison for assault and conspiracy. While the investigation into his own personal life had been underway, Police Chief Burke had rejected any FBI offers of involvement on the serial killer case due to his own negative perceptions of the agents. So while the FBI had previously assisted in the search and profiling, they had failed to become officially a part of the investigation, and thus many resources went unutilized in the initial years of the case. But with Burke no longer in charge of the case, the FBI was invited to assist. In December of 2015, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Tim Sinai announced that the FBI had finally joined the investigation. The FBI had supplied a personality profile for the probable killer back in 2011, which detailed the likely psychological map of the killer's life. The FBI surmised that the suspect was somewhere between his late 20s and mid-40s, that he was a white Caucasian male who likely had a girlfriend or was married, and that he was well-educated, working a stable job. The FBI noted that it was possible that the man had been to the hospital for poison ivy treatment in the past, as he undoubtedly came in contact with the vine during his many travels in the Gilgo Beach brush. This was surmised as investigators had to contend not only with the variable weather, but also the heavy bush of the geography of the area, which was filled with poison ivy. During the search for more victims, some rescue workers later required prednisone treatments from the prolonged exposure to the poison ivy. The FBI profilers also cited that the suspect may have access to burlap sacks. The police also wonder if a man named Andrew Frey was involved. He was arrested recently on charges of trying to traffic sex workers and kidnapping them. They noted that he had the same predilections and patterns as the Long Island serial killer, but as noted in media reports, he is not an official suspect yet. A much less discussed clue is that of the burlap material in which Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello's remains were found. Many people have theorized that whomever abducted and killed the 4 girls had access to burlap bags aplenty, at least to the point where transporting them would not seem out of the ordinary. It was theorized that a man named James Bissett may have been involved in some capacity, as it was common knowledge by those in the gardening business that he was the primary supplier of burlap material in the Long Island region, due to the fact that he was co-owner of the Long Island Nursery. Shockingly, he would take his own life on December 14, 2011, less than 48 hours after Shannan Gilbert's remains were found. On September 12, 2017, Suffolk County Prosecutor Robert Biancavilla from the County District Attorney's Office announced that John Bitroloff, a carpenter from Manorville, Long Island, was an official suspect in at least one of the killings on Long Island. Bitroloff had been convicted in May of 2017 for the murders of 2 sex workers in 1993 and 1994. Another suspect that police looked into was Dr. Charles Peter Hackett. Hackett was the first person of interest in the case of Shannan Gilbert's murder, due to the strange series of events that transpired at his hands after Shannan made the harrowing 911 call the night of her disappearance. Reportedly, Michael Pock, Shannan's driver and illicit business associate, gave Dr. Hackett her family's info in hopes that he might see the missing girl and alert them. Dr. Hackett reportedly then called Shannan's mother, Mari Gilbert, and told her that he, quote, ran a home for wayward girls, and that he had recently had Shannan in his house. He expressed concern to Shannan's mother over her missing status. Suspicious to investigators was the fact that her mother, Mari, was not even aware that Shannan was missing at this point. Shannan's mother told police about the phone call, and they investigated. After the investigation was complete, it was found that Hackett had indeed called Mari after her daughter's disappearance. According to court records, Dr. Hackett had been previously employed as an emergency services doctor, but he never ran any sort of home for troubled youth. He lived in the same gated community in Oak Beach as the John that Shannan was visiting that night. When interrogated by the cops, Hackett denied the whole thing, until phone records came out and proved that he had in fact called Shannan's mother. In addition, the CCTV footage of the gated community was collected and stored by none other than Dr. Hackett, who was also head of the HOA. However, when police requested the CCTV footage, Hackett claimed it was accidentally deleted. Dr. Hackett has an ICD, an implantable cardioverter defibrillator. This is evidenced by news footage which shows Hackett's heart device acting up around the media equipment. At one point, in one of Hackett's televised interviews, his ICD seems to do something to his body internally, and Dr. Hackett falls to the ground on camera. Some wondered if Hackett's ICD may have been connected to the previous theory that the killer gave the call girls a specific medical excuse in regards to why they needed to leave their phones at home. Online theorists have pointed to some of the nearby parks as being a potential place of employment for the killer. Investigators have theorized that the killer may work in a park and is someone who could walk freely among the brush, carrying burlap bags perhaps, unnoticed by the public. Some point to the choice of dump site as evidence of the killer being a local, as the areas chosen seemed specific in their anonymity. The area in which these body parts were popping up was not welcoming, nor were they well trafficked. The choice of a dump spot seemed carefully planned and calculated, as it was an area most untraversed by humans. Some wonder if a boat may have been involved due to the proximity of the crime scene to the ocean. On January 16, 2020, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Geraldine Hart released images of a belt found at the crime scene with the letters HM or WH, depending on the orientation of the belt, embossed in black leather. The belt had been found during the initial investigation near Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach. Police believe that the belt was handled by the perpetrator and that it did not belong to any of the victims. The police revealed few details about the belt's evidentiary value and would not comment on exactly where it had been found. It was also announced that new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation and that they had launched GilgoNews.com, a website enabling the department to share news and receive tips regarding the investigation. Separately, the FBI posted on their Facebook page that they were seeking relatives and friends of a man named Elijah Lige Howell, or Howard, who lived from 1927 until 1963. Mr. Howard previously lived in Pritchard, Alabama, and was married to a woman named Carrie. Investigators state that relatives of this man may be able to assist finding the identities of Peaches and her child. The post also asked if viewers recognized the peach tattoo on the body of the deceased mother. Strangely enough, in July of 2016, Mari Gilbert, Shannon Gilbert's mother, who was a constant presence in the inquiry into her daughter's death, was fatally stabbed by her younger daughter, 27-year-old Sarah Gilbert, who had been in and out of psychiatric hospitals since 2014. It was reported that Shannon's sister had drowned a puppy prior to taking her own mother's life. The family attorney says that she suffered auditory and visual hallucinations a few years prior to the fatal stabbing. It is unclear if this mental health issue is hereditary or environmental in its origin, but it does potentially shed some new perspective on Shannon Gilbert's 911 call and frantic cries of impending doom. Some wonder, with this new information, if the 911 call does not show a woman in danger at all, but someone in the thralls of their own mental health crisis, possibly hallucinating as her sister had started to years prior. If Shannon was falsely perceiving danger, then her initial 911 call would prove to be more of a red herring, as that would suppose that she was not actually in danger until she left the confines of the homes in the gated community and made her way into the dark marshes of the area. Such movement was reported by a neighbor who saw her walk off in the direction of the wetlands. If Shannon was not actually in danger and was instead having a mental health crisis, then her death may have been unrelated to the initial 911 phone call. Some wonder if Shannon's initial cry for help was simply an unfortunate coincidence, which later led her face to face with her killer. Investigators still say that the Gilbert case is unrelated to the other bodies, but those close to the case take umbrage with such assertions, as they say her body being found in such close proximity to the other victims shows a clear link. To this day, the killer or killers responsible are still at large. Not only is the continued presence of an unknown killer in New York alarming in and of itself, but the fact that some of the victims of this murderer are still unnamed, prolonging the pain and uncertainty of countless indirect victims in the form of friends and family, is a further injustice to those lost. This killer is also referred to as the Craigslist killer in media reports due to his choice of websites from which to contact call girls. Craigslist as a corporation did eventually make the decision to take down the sex categories, but loopholes remain which allow the supply and demand of sex workers to persist. This is an active and ongoing unsolved serial killer case. If anyone has any information about this case or those involved, please call 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-CALL-FBI, or visit tips.fbi.gov.